Art restoration is meant to preserve masterpieces for future generations, but sometimes it turns into a true cultural disaster. No one needs to be told that the restoration of works of art should be entrusted to genuine professionals rather than to people who are merely looking to make a quick profit. Nevertheless, numerous examples of failed restorations prove that owners are willing to take risks and place works of art in the hands of the first person they meet, simply to save money. The fresco Ecce Homo, or Behold the Man, by Elias Garcia Martinez, is undoubtedly one of the most famous examples of unsuccessful restoration. When the priest of the Sanctuary of Mercy in the tiny Spanish town of Borja allowed one of his parishioners, the 81-year-old Cecilia Jimenez, to restore one of the church's frescoes, he could hardly have imagined that at that very moment the life of the entire town would change forever. Although Señora Cecilia Jimenez had previously carried out a couple of minor restorations in other churches in Zaragoza, she was by no means a professional restorer, let alone an artist. The restoration of a fresco is an extremely complex technical task that requires, among other things, serious preparation of the original surface. Without much hesitation, Cecilia simply began applying paint directly over Martinez's original work. It seems almost unbelievable, but the priest decided to look at Cecilia's work for the first time only 2 years after the restoration had begun. This despite the fact that the fresco was located in the most prominent place, immediately to the left of the altar. Be that as it may, by that point enough paint had already been applied to produce what journalists would later describe as the worst restoration in the history of painting. Instead of the face of Jesus, the renewed fresco now displayed something that more closely resembled a shaggy monkey, as a result of which the work was quickly dubbed Ecce Homo, Monkey Christ. The image instantly spread around the world and became an internet phenomenon. The wave of jokes and mockery took a toll on the elderly restorer's health, though not for long. It was only natural that outraged art lovers and parishioners demanded, if not that the culprit be held accountable, then at least that the fresco be returned to its original appearance. But at that point, the internet fell in love with Monkey Christ. People rallied to the side of Cecilia Jimenez. Petitions with tens of thousands of signatures were collected in defense of the fluffy Jesus. The work itself began to be regarded as an example of contemporary art, compared to the works of Goya, described as a symbol of our way of seeing the world, and praised for the fact that a simple village pensioner had managed to turn an unremarkable image into a pop icon. The number of tourists visiting the previously obscure Spanish town increased tenfold, while donations to the church reached an astonishing $50,000 per year. Part of the income from tourism began to be shared with Cecilia Jimenez, as well as with the granddaughter of the original author of the fresco. And what about the original? Elias Garcia Martinez can hardly be classified among Spain's great painters. Born in 1858, and beginning his career at a time when new artistic movements were constantly emerging across Europe, Martinez nevertheless remained faithful to a rather academic approach to painting. Pleasant Spanish landscapes and a handful of portraits. That is almost all that remains of the artist's legacy. Interestingly, Martinez's Behold the Man had never been considered a valuable work. According to Martinez himself, it was the result of 2 hours devoted to the Virgin Mary. The short amount of time required to create the fresco can be explained both by the fact that it was merely a copy of one of his own paintings, and by the fact that the artist applied paint directly onto the wall without prior priming. This latter circumstance largely predetermined the rapid deterioration of the fresco and the near impossibility of its restoration. And yet, it was still the result of creative inspiration directed toward God. As a result of Cecilia Jimenez's ignorance, in 2012, the Sanctuary of Mercy became a place of attraction for people from all over Spain and the world. The town of Borja significantly improved its financial situation. The name of Elias Garcia Martinez was brought back from oblivion. His descendants began receiving royalties from the altered, yet still his work, including from its use on countless souvenir products. And Cecilia Jimenez herself gained the means to care for her seriously ill grandson. And while the attempt to restore the Behold the Man fresco was carried out free of charge, out of a desire to help, the author of the restoration of a copy of a famous work by Esteban Murillo, the Immaculate Conception, presented the owner of the painting with a bill for €1,200. A private collector from Valencia entrusted a furniture restorer and restorer of household objects with cleaning a copy of a work by the famous artist. When he received the painting back, it turned out that the face of the Virgin Mary had been disfigured. The image now looked more like a clumsy child's drawing or a caricature. Fortunately, it was not an original Baroque masterpiece, but merely a copy, though that offered little consolation to the collector. After a serious conversation with the client, the unfortunate restorer made another attempt to restore the Virgin's face, but this too ended in failure. Nevertheless, payment for the work was made, since under Spanish law, the work, though of poor quality, was still considered legal. The original artwork was created by the Spanish painter in the second half of the 17th century. It is now housed in the Prado Museum in Madrid. Murillo originally worked on his masterpiece with the intention of hanging it in a monastery. The priceless painting was completed between 1660 and 1665. Over the course of his life, Murillo painted around 24 versions of the Immaculate Conception. In most of them, the Virgin Mary is depicted wearing a white robe and a blue mantle. In this particular painting, the young and beautiful Virgin Mary stands on a crescent moon, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze directed toward the heavens. She appears to rise lightly into the sky, surrounded by light, clouds, and angels. Murillo's manner involved a fusion of the themes of the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption. It is characterized by a triumphant tone and the complete absence of traditional symbols, such as the Tower of David, the sealed fountain, palm trees, or cypresses. Friends, in this video, I did not mention the most famous case of disastrous restoration, the Ghent altarpiece. To speak only about the restoration without saying a word about the altar itself, its patrons, its creators, and its difficult history would also be wrong. Therefore, if you enjoyed this video, I will certainly make a separate one devoted specifically to the restoration of the altarpiece. Finally, a few more examples of terrible restorations. In 2013, in the Yunji Temple complex in China, municipal authorities of the Chaoyang district decided to restore ancient frescoes dating back to the Qing dynasty. However, they chose to save money on specialists, and as a result, bright scenes from Buddhist legends appeared in place of the ancient paintings, scenes that bore no resemblance whatsoever to the originals. Those responsible were dismissed, and the head of the local party cell received a reprimand for damage to religious objects. In June 2018, a Spanish church located in the town of Estella carried out a failed restoration of a wooden sculpture of Saint George, created in the 16th century. Representatives of the church, having decided to restore a medieval artifact of historical and artistic value, hired a drawing teacher for this noble task. She was happy to help. As a result, the world was presented with a figure sporting a fleshy, peach-colored face, suffering from strabismus, and clad in grey armor with bright red elements. The same colors were applied to the horse. City authorities and local residents were outraged by such vandalism, despite the absence of malicious intent on the part of both the restorer and the client. The image of St. George is a large sculpture depicting the saint on horseback slaying a dragon. He is dressed as a warrior, with his helmet raised. It was created around the year 1500, probably by the master Tarin or Terin, a native of Zaragoza and the author of several well-known works. A year later, the sculpture was finally restored. It was returned to the same colors it had before the previous restoration, but at the cost of losing a layer of the original paint. The second restoration cost $37,000. The church that had carried out the earlier restoration paid a fine of $6,800. And now I'd like to ask you, which restoration do you think was the most horrifying of all? Share your opinion in the comments. I'm really curious to read your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories from the world of art. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.